You have to really believe in magic to believe that this many tiny accidents all happen on top of each other at the exact same time. Obviously, there is a God, a designer running the entire world. Now, is that a flawless argument? It's not. It's a deeply flawed argument, as a matter of fact. If that was all I had, I would honestly end the session and tell you to go try a different religion. That is not the only argument we have. What we're talking about today is why a scientist, a rational person, might believe in God and in Torah. And the reason why I'm giving this lecture is because I am a scientist, and presumably I am a rational person, and I can guarantee you I believe without any doubt whatsoever in the existence of God, the veracity of Torah, and the reliability of our tradition as it has been passed down from Sinai to this present day, every single word, every single letter. And the question is why a scientist might do such a thing. That's what we're going to explore today, and we're going to do it in some primary sources. The question I get asked a lot is, as a rational person who has based a lot of my career, at least, on the collection of good evidence for things, somebody who believes that we make our best decisions when we look at a lot of good evidence pointing in the same direction, do I have fantastic, rational, slam dunk evidence for the existence of God and or the veracity of the Torah? And the answer is no. And thank you all very much. Next session. That's it. It's the whole talk. No, I don't. I don't have it. And I do want to take a second to at least tell you why I believe, because it's not because of rationalism. I don't believe in these things because of a rational argument. I do believe in them. I don't just believe in them. I'm certain of them. I'm certain of God. I'm certain of the Torah. And it does not come from a rational place regarding me, at the very least. I can only speak about myself. But I'll tell you why I believe. I believe because this is what I literally am. I have a literal piece of God inside me. That is the definition of a soul, according to the second chapter of the Holy Sefer Tanya Kadisha. Every single Jew has in them a chelek Eloka mimal mamish, a literal piece of God animating them in their lives. There are multiple aspects of this soul. One aspect of this soul is on high to this day, staring God in the face, so to speak, an expression known as Mazal Yahu Chazi. I have a part of my soul that testifies at every moment of the existence of God and the veracity of the Torah. I believe because I'm part of it. I believe because I can look in the mirror. The Torah is my book, God is my God, and I'm part of the story. It's not rational. Rational is weak compared to the reality of what I am. I believe because I'm part of this story. I believe because I'm part of this God. That's where mine comes from. The truth is, doubts and faith are not natural to the Jewish people. I did a bit of a survey a little while ago of letters that the Rebbe responded to, where people wrote to him saying that they aren't sure they believe in God. Believe it or not, a lot of people write this to the Rebbe. A lot of people would write to the Rebbe, everything's going great, the children are fine, things are wonderful, I'm learning a lot of Torah, not sure I believe in God, but whatever, and just keep on. And the Rebbe would stop them. And I found something like 15 or 20 letters where the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave the exact same answer to this exact same claim every single time. Every time somebody writes to the Rebbe and says, I'm not sure I believe in God, I'm not sure I believe in the Torah, God forbid, the Rebbe writes back, oh, you believe. He doesn't let them get away with it. He doesn't. I want to read to you an excerpt from one of these letters. My translation, so forgive it. The holy books attest, this is the Rebbe writing, the holy books attest to the fact that every single Jew has complete faith in God because every single Jew is called a son or daughter of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. However, sometimes the evil inclination confuses the power of thought and misleads a person into thinking about other things or opposite things. Intrinsic to a Jew is belief. You believe, you just have an Yetzer Hara. You just have an animalistic soul. You just have an evil inclination. And that's welcome to the club. But a Jew believes. And that's not rational. And you didn't come to this session to hear me brag about my faith. That said, don't worry, now we're going to do the rationalism, I promise. That said, our sages throughout the generations have made solid rational arguments for the truth of God, the truth of Torah, the existence of both, and the reliability of both. The question is why they would do such a thing. Why would the sages spend any time on this, given that the best proof in the world of God and Torah is you looking in the mirror and recognizing the truth of yourself? And I have no idea. I have a couple guesses. One guess is that perhaps they hoped some of these arguments would weaken the power of the evil inclination and allow you to access your best and most true self. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that they were giving us the tools to speak to other people who are struggling and help them begin to walk along the path of faith. Nonetheless, I will tell you, we're going to explore some rational arguments. We're going to go on an adventure through not just rationalism, but also through Jewish history. Before we do that, if I'm going to tell you why a scientist believes, we'd better establish why scientists believe in things in the first place. The phrase that's up on the screen was popularized by the legendary biologist E.O. Wilson. He did not invent the phrase, but he did write a whole and fairly controversial book on it, and his theory was that when it comes to evidence, we very rarely have a straight line for anything in science. We usually don't have proof. Scientific proof essentially does not exist. What we do in science is we collect a whole lot of evidence, all pointing in the same general direction. Each piece of evidence in and of itself has a couple weak points, but we collect the evidence together, and we have something that he called consilience of evidence, which means that when multiple arguments all point rationally in the same direction, even if they might have some minor weaknesses, the weaknesses are crossed out by the strengths, and these arguments end up pushing a rational person in a proper direction. Meaning, in science, we don't really look for slam dunk arguments. In science, we look for a preponderance of evidence. We look for a consilience of evidence. The closest thing we have in medical science, as far as I know, to causation, not correlation, is the correlation, the link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. That's still not, we can never really prove causation, but we are so close. I mean, that is a link we're very comfortable with. People who smoke cigarettes are much more likely to get lung cancer. That did not happen all by itself, and it didn't happen because we got ourselves some slam dunk evidence. It started with epidemiological studies. It started with good evidence coming in that the kind of people who smoke tend to be the kind of people who get lung cancer, and that didn't mean smoking caused lung cancer, but it was one piece of evidence with flaws pointing in that direction. We added onto it a bunch of animal studies. Mice exposed to these carcinogens were getting cancer. Now, you are not a mouse, at least not most of you. I don't judge. But we can't prove much from animal studies. However, watching animals get lung cancer from being around cigarette smoke, plus the epidemiological studies, started pushing us in the right direction. We started doing chemical analyses. We started analyzing the tumor cells themselves for the carcinogenic markers. And when you put all of this together, no one piece of evidence really points to cigarette smoking causing lung cancer as a slam dunk argument. But when you have thousands of studies all pointing in the same direction, each one with a weakness that's covered by the other one's strength, you end up with a consilience of the evidence. And at that point, a rational person agrees, oh yeah, we better not be smoking cigarettes. That said, that's what we're looking for here. The rational arguments I'm going to show you have flaws. They have apparent flaws, but they point in the same direction. And what we're going to try to do today is build a consilience of evidence for God and Torah. Despite the fact that I told you earlier that I believe the proper bedrock of every Jew's faith is their blind faith. We're going to build a consilience of the evidence. All right. We're off to the races. I have here what is called the argument from design. At least that's what I call it. And each time we give an argument, we're going to give a little bit of Jewish history along with it. So we're also going on a bit of a Jewish history adventure. This particular argument was popularized, although it shows up in a lot of places. Well, really one of the heroes of it was Rabbeinu Bechaya ibn Pekuda. Rabbeinu Bechaya ibn Pekuda, he lived about 800 years ago. He was a rabbinic judge in Saragossa, Spain. If you study Jewish history, you will discover that just about everybody you've ever heard of at some point came through Spain, except for Rashi and his grandsons and one or two other sources. So he lived in Saragossa during the Golden Age. He wrote in Arabic. His translator, by the way, was the same Ibn Tibbon family that translated the works of the Rambam. So he wrote a very famous book that I'm sure you've heard of, the Chovas Halavavos, the Duties of the Heart. In there is a chapter that is even more famous than the book itself, which is known as the Shar HaBitachon, the Gate of Trust. Many of you, I imagine, have studied it or have a copy of it. I have up on the screen that there's a group, Chayenu. I'm sure some of you study or subscribe to Chayenu. Chayenu recently printed a good translation with commentary of the Shar HaBitachon and handed it out to soldiers on the front line, and many soldiers sent in pictures showing that they were going into battle with this book that is supposed to help people through troubled times recognize their belief in God and their trust in God. He makes the argument that examination of the wisdom manifest in the universe is the nearest way to clarify the existence of God and the clearest path to know his reality, which means that the world is too complicated to not have a master. You've heard this one before. Don't worry, we're going to build on it. But let's start from the very, very baseline. Rabbi Akiva said a very similar thing in a medrash. He said, if you'd like to know testimony about a tailor, look at the cloth. Cloth testifies about a tailor. A house testifies about a builder. The truth is, the universe is so complex, life is so complex, and the conditions for life are so complex that it absolutely is illogical to assume that this world came into being all by itself and that there's not a creator making every single thing. The more you study science, the more you become convinced of this. It's just too complex and just too convenient. This is also something known as the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle is that the conditions, the accidents, the random noise noise that it takes to put us on Earth in just the right place in the universe that we are able to survive, honestly, that much random noise stops looking so random after a little while. This is one of those cases where it requires more magical thinking to be an atheist than it does to be a theist. You have to really believe in magic to believe that this many tiny accidents all happen on top of each other at the exact same time. Obviously, there is a God, a designer running the entire world. Now, is that a flawless argument? It's not. It's a deeply flawed argument, as a matter of fact. If that was all I had, I would honestly end the session and tell you to go try a different religion. That is not the only argument we have. But remember what we're doing here. We're doing consilience of the evidence. What we want to do is we want to find multiple data points all pointing in the same direction where each strength covers another area's weakness. So we're starting at the very baseline at honestly the least compelling of the arguments, which is this world is too good to have just been made. Is it possible this world was just randomly made? No, it's not. We believe in God. But is that theoretically, intellectually? Sure, it's not a slam dunk. We're not looking for slam dunks. We're looking for a scientist's rational view of Torah. We're looking for a collection, a consilience of evidence. So let's move right along to the next of our great leaders. Everybody says this is a picture of the Ramban. I don't know why they say that. I don't think we have any pictures of the Ramban. I would like to note, I keep on emphasizing the nun there, Ramban, because this is not Rambam. This ain't your grandma's Rambam. This is not Rambam. This is Ramban Nachmanides. And although he has a very similar name and honestly a fairly similar life, his work is substantially different. The Ramban was born in Girona, Spain, recognizing a theme here, all the great thinkers at some point in Spain, and he was born in the year 1195. He was a physician. He was the rabbi of Girona. He wrote some of the earliest accessible works of Kabbalah and authored many works on the Talmud, as well as his very popular commentary on the Torah. He lived academically and peacefully in Spain until his 70s, and in his 70s, the church asked him to come by and debate them. He won and was banished from Spain. That's kind of the story of the Jewish people. Definitely right, everybody else is definitely wrong, and now you have to leave before anybody finds out. He fled to the land of Israel, and he's buried in Haifa. The Ramban's main argument, I have one up on the screen, but the Ramban's main argument for the veracity of Torah, the reliability of Torah, the truth of Judaism, is what I would call, and what other people have called, the argument from prophecy. That is, that there are so many prophecies in the Torah that are incredibly unlikely on face value, so unlikely to have been true, and nonetheless, they came true. There is one, I will tell you, that has not yet come true, that I expect to come true before the end of this lecture, and that is the coming of our holy Messiah. Amen. But besides for that, we have fantastic evidence of our prophecies coming true. Besides what I have on the screen, a lot of them are a little dark. I hope you're okay with a little dark. But a little dark, in Devarim, God says in the book of Deuteronomy, that we will become an astonishment and a proverb among the nations. That people will say, I can't believe people hate them so much. And people will call hated people Jews colloquially because it is so astounding that anybody could hate us as much as we are hated. That is prophesied 3,500 years ago in our texts. And let me tell you something, anti-Semitism continues to baffle experts across the world. They cannot understand how any people can be so specifically hated by everybody, including us. Everybody. Avram was promised in the Torah, our patriarch Abraham was promised that we would be a very tiny nation that would bring blessings to the entire world and have an outsized impact. That is a weird prediction to make for a tiny nation, but the truth is we have always been small, we've always been numerically insignificant, and nonetheless you can map throughout history the countries that took us in succeeded, the ones that kicked us out ended up failing. We've given the world most of its values. Almost everything that is considered modern morality stems from the Torah and from Judaism, despite the fact that we are a blink in the world, despite the fact that we are a small piece of broader society. And then there is the Ramban's proof, which is up on the screen. The Torah tells us that once we are kicked out of the land of Israel, exiled because of our sins, the land will never blossom for anybody ever again. The Jewish people have the magic touch. We live there, the land succeeds. We leave, no one can make this piece of barren desert grow. And the Ramban says, a long time before 1948, the Ramban says, look, it's been 1,000 years since we were kicked out, and no one has made this work. And 1,000 years after that, still nobody had made it work. And the Jewish people came back recently to the land of Israel, and the land works again. How in the world do you make a prophecy like that without there being truth in the Torah? So the Ramban himself writes, the greatest proof for the truth of Torah is the fact that Israel will not respond to anybody who touches it except for a Jew. Put anybody else there and it's desert. Put a Jew there, hydroponic farms in Gaza. Take the Jews out, a desert again. Is this a flawed argument? Once again, of course it is. It's logic. One of the great things about intellect is that intellect can always be, let me use some Yiddish, slugged up by other intellect. Obviously, it's not perfect. If this was all I had, we'd go home. But remember what we're doing, consilience of the evidence. We're finding multiple points throughout Jewish history pointing in the same direction to build a case. And so far what we have is the argument from design and the argument from prophecy. Let's see if we've got anything else in our collection. This gentleman over here, honestly, what he's about to say on the screen, a lot of sages have said. Why did I choose him? Because his name is Yechiel. That's right. Let me tell you something. I'm not kidding. Let me tell you something, all you Menachem Mendels. It ain't easy growing up a Yechiel. Do you know how many famous Yechiels we have? This is like the only one. Him, Yechiel mi Paris, Yechiel Michal Zlotchever, and me. That's it. So yeah, I have a bias toward the 4 famous Yechiels in Jewish history, and so I chose him. It's okay. Or it's not okay, but it's my slide. I get to choose. Yechiel Michal Epstein, the Aruch HaShulchan. He was born in 1829, so we're going a little bit forward in history, in Babroisk, which back then was Russia, like everywhere in the world, but nowadays is Belarus. He really broke down barriers. He was trained by the opponents of Hasidus. His closest friends were the strongest opponents of Hasidus, and yet he was hired to be the rabbi of a town in Russia that was predominantly Chabad Hasidim. So he's one of our rabbis, Chabad and Chernobyl Hasidim. I've read that he met the 3rd Rebbe of Lubavitch, the Tzemach Tzedek. So he was somebody who really broke barriers and crossed lines. He wrote, his most enduring work is the Aruch HaShulchan. I think sometimes he's known as the Aruch HaShulchan by name of his most enduring work. And the Aruch HaShulchan is a work that summarizes Jewish law, but it doesn't just do that. It summarizes Jewish law. It does a couple deep dives, occasionally takes you down a rabbit hole that is just so fascinating, so interesting, and so deep and important for the practical implementation of Jewish law that is indispensable as a legal text, while also being the most fun you can have in a legal text. And I'm not just saying it because his name's Yechiel. This is not, by the way, the Shulchan Aruch. You got it backwards. This is the Aruch HaShulchan. His argument, and again, other people make this argument too, is that there's no greater sign or proof of the truth of Torah and the truth of God and the truth of Judaism than the fact that we are still here today. He writes this in the 1800s. That was not that long ago. It feels like long ago, but honestly, I spend all my time with people who lived 2,000 years ago, so somebody who lived in the 1800s is like a close cousin. How have we made it? It doesn't make any sense. What are the odds that a small people, constantly oppressed, taken from country to country, kicked out of their land, put somewhere else, kicked out of that land, put somewhere else, transferred from place to place, would survive? What are the rational odds? This is another one of those cases where not believing in God and Torah requires more magical thinking than believing in it. How exactly does a rational person explain our survival? 2,000 years of exile. The only reason for our survival, writes my namesake, not really, is because of God's providence that is not removed from us even for a moment, like a father who watches over his only child. I call this the argument from history. Look back in Jewish history. How do you explain the fact that we are here today? Not just here today, barely surviving, but having recovered and then some after the Holocaust, filling rooms in a hotel in Washington, D.C. to talk about Torah in the year 2025. If that's not proof of God, nothing is your proof of God. Is this a perfect argument? Not even a little bit. Roll the dice, man. Maybe we might not, I didn't even really look into it. We might not be the only one. We've been around a long time. We've had a lot of exiles. I think it's compelling to claim that we have unique area to stake out in this particular argument, that we can uniquely say we've survived the most oppression for the longest. But the truth is there some chance that a people not favored by God just happens to keep on getting smacked down and building back up because we are, tenacious? I guess. But consilience of the evidence is the name of the game, and we're building a case, and it all keeps on pointing in the same direction in our primary sources. And by the way, in case you missed it, we're learning Torah as well. Every single thing we've done is a primary Jewish text. As we study the Torah and we study the great sages and their ideas, we're beginning to build a rational case on top of our bedrock of faith. At least I hope that's what we're doing. Recognize this gentleman on the screen, this very holy rabbi. This is Rav Soloveitchik. You know for sure that he was a very holy rabbi. His nickname is the Rav. Nobody calls me the Rav. Rav Soloveitchik, he lived from 1903 to 1999. He ordained something like 2,000 rabbis in his lifetime. He was a Torah genius. He made Yeshiva University what it is and raised a generation of thinkers. He's considered one of the fathers of modern orthodoxy. He's considered one of the great philosophers of the past generation. His outstanding scholarship is apparent in all of his work, and several of his very accessible works on faith have been translated into many, many languages, and one of them is up on the screen right now. This is known as the halachic man. You might have heard of Lonely Man of Faith. That's another one of his real big ones. He writes that we don't need any miracles or wonders to prove that God exists. Everything I've told you up until now is pretty miraculous. He says, I don't need it. I'm a rational thinker. I don't need that at all. Jewish law itself, in his original, I translated, his original, he says, halacha. Jewish law itself bears witness to its creator. Now, I can't put words in his mouth. I don't know what he means because he doesn't explain himself in that part of the book. But I can tell you what I think that means because I think Jewish law very well testifies to the Creator. Jewish law works. It works really, really well. First of all, the precedents are all there. How many legal texts written, given to the Jewish people 3,500 years ago can figure out what to do with electronics? How many of them can figure out what to do with IVF? How many of them have in there precedent for airplanes and the laws surrounding them? By the way, everything I just listed, Google it. We've been working on it for years. Everything in the Torah applies forever. The precedent, the lasting ability of it suggests, very strongly suggests, I think testifies to the fact that there is a divine, infinite God who created these Jewish laws and put them together. But it's really not just precedent, it also works, it testifies to itself. We say on Shabbos, tzadku yachtav. The words of Torah are beautiful because they line up so nicely. If you study Jewish law, things snap into place. The entire system, which to people who are new to it, seems like it has multiple opinions and moving parts. Study it a little deeper, you'll find it fits together like a jigsaw puzzle. There is no system more beautiful, no system more comprehensive, and no system more godly than that of Jewish law. By the way, I would like to add, with humility, to the words of Rav Soloveitchik, Kabbalah does the same thing. Mysticism works too well to not be God's mysticism. When people ask me for advice with their problems in faith, what I usually will tell them is, let's put that aside for now and study some Torah, and the questions will answer themselves. Not because we're going to study a piece of Torah that answers their questions, but because the Torah works so well that it testifies to its own veracity. There are very few people studying Chassidus who wonder whether God exists. They're too busy trying to figure out how the worlds and the spheres and the lights work. There are very few people delving into the deepest areas of Jewish law who take a moment and go, hey, wait a minute, is there a God? When you're doing it, it's apparent it works. A possible parable for this, although I'm not much of a math guy, this one occurs to me, is that you could in theory prove that math is true, but you know the fastest way to demonstrate that math is true? Engineering is the fastest way to demonstrate that math is true. Show me that the math can plan a trajectory perfectly for interception, and suddenly I can prove the math by the fact that the math works. Jewish law and Kabbalah work so well that they testify to the veracity of the underlying idea. And the big underlying idea, what Jewish law screams from the top of its lungs every time you learn it, what Kabbalah testifies from the mountaintops, is that God Almighty made this. This is His will. It has never changed, and it's all true. Is that proof? No, we're not doing proof today. Consilience of the evidence. We're seeing a lot of things pointing in the same direction. If you don't know who this is, I don't know how to help you at this point. My Rebbe needs no introduction. He's the undisputed leader of world Jewry. The word genius would cheapen it, so I'm not going to say it. But as long as I'm here, I'm going to say it. Genius, obviously. It cheapens it. Recognized by Jews and Gentiles as the leading force of good of our time. Also, I will say we have great Jewish leaders. Throughout the ages, we've had great Jewish leaders. The only Jewish leader who cared enough to send a shliach to your town because he cared about you. And by the way, the only Jewish leader of all these very, very holy and very, very good people who cared enough to send shluchim to my town to help my family. So also, the only one who's really got your back. What else can I say? He makes a lot of these arguments. He says a lot of these things. I'm attributing this one to him just because nobody else, as far as I can tell, makes this particular argument. But the Rebbe says, what about the argument from expert opinion? He has a couple. I'm not going to read the letter. You can read it if you can up on the screen. He says, you make a lot of decisions based on what experts say. And if multiple experts all say the same thing, you tend to lean into that decision pretty heavily. We don't usually do our own research all that much. We might think we do it because we have Google, but at the end of the day, you end up trusting the surgeon. And when you buy a train ticket, you end up trusting the conductor. There's something to be said for expert opinion. How many of our ancestors, how many of our great sages, how many of the greatest intellectual and moral lights of history at large, are convinced 100% of the truth of God and Torah? How about the Rebbe himself? The Rebbe has no doubts whatsoever of the truth of God and Torah. His faith, and please don't understand this the wrong way, I mean it only as a compliment, his faith is like that of a small child. He believes with the wide-eyed wonder of a child's belief, and he's the smartest man ever. Isn't there something to be said for really, really smart people who are not silly? I don't think anybody thinks the Rebbe is silly, petty, or magical in thinking. I don't think anybody believes that the Rebbe dedicated his entire life to Baba Mises. And by the way, I don't think anybody thinks Abaye and Rava did either, or Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, or Rav Soloveitchik, who we had up on the screen a moment ago, or my favorite Yechiel. I don't think any of us think that the Rambam, the genius Maimonides, dedicated his life to silliness. What about trusting the fact that geniuses who we know are serious people who are, by the way, skeptical and critical of everything? Have you read some Talmud? You say anything, they'll question it. One thing never questioned by any of these people is the existence of God and the truth of Torah. They question everything. It means something. Is that proof? As a matter of fact, it's the opposite of proof. It's a logical fallacy. That doesn't matter because we're not looking for proof. We're looking for consilience. And part of the factor of stuff pointing in the same direction should be that the rabbis of the Talmud were not silly or petty or small-minded people. God forbid. And the Rambam was a genius who took everything very seriously and questioned everything and rewrote entire systems around it. And the Alter Rebbe built an entire philosophy around it. And the Rebbe himself testified to it on multiple occasions. Doesn't authority mean anything? I don't think it means everything, but I sure think it means something. Let's add it into the mix as we build our consilience case. This is the grand prize. This is the closest thing we have to a slam dunk rational argument that could almost stand on its own, but it's frequently taught wrong, and I'd like to make sure in this particular occasion it's taught correctly. There are many, many rabbis who made this argument. The Rebbe makes it in several letters, and as a matter of fact, every rabbi I put on the screen up until now, in some form or another, makes this argument as well. I'm attributing it to Rebbe Yehuda Halevi, because as far as I know, he's the first to make this argument, at least the first famous source to make this argument. Rebbe Yehuda Halevi, he was born in Toledo in 1080. He was a master of Torah, but also of Arabic poetry, Hebrew grammar, philosophy, and medicine. He traveled south to Al-Andalus to study under Rav Yitzchak Al-Fasi the Rif, who, by the way, was the teacher of the father of the Rambam, and when the Rambam carried his method of learning Torah to the east, he took with it the school of thought that was the same as Rebbe Yehuda Halevi and the Rifs. This is also the Rambam's school of thought. He wrote heart-rending poems about the yearning of a Jew to return to Israel. You are probably familiar with the classic Jewish poem that says that although I am in the west, my heart is in the east. How can I enjoy my food when I'm thinking about the fact that I'm far away from my homeland? That was him. His poems endure to this day, and his thoughts endure to this day. One of his most enduring works is the Kuzari, where he created a story, a hypothetical, a conversation between multiple other religious people and a group of Khazars, I don't even know how to say it, a group of people who had not yet decided what religion they wanted to adopt, and he creates a dialogue between them and the other religions to demonstrate the truth of Judaism, one of the first true works to try to prove Judaism rationally. And he makes the following two-part argument. Number one, mass revelation. No other religion can claim mass revelation. Certainly no other major religion. I can't say any. I mean, people make up new things every day. There's a new religion every 4 minutes. But and some of them come from literal books of science fiction. So I mean, they're literal books of science fiction. If you know what I'm talking about, you know. So I don't know, could be. But of the major world religions, Christianity and Islam both claim that either one person or a small group of people saw God, dealt with God directly, and that everybody else is supposed to trust them that they saw what they saw. Jewish people are the only ones who make the claim that something like 2 million people, all standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, talked to God, heard his voice, and were commanded by him directly. And not only that, he has a second argument up on the screen that you don't see in a lot of places. We also make the claim in the Torah that 2 million people were sustained by a heavenly catering business for 40 years in the desert. And here's the rub. You could make that up. You could falsify that. You could write a book 1,000 years later saying, by the way, there was an ancient people, they were in the desert, they all heard God and they were fed by manna. But you know what you can't do? You can't do it with an unbroken tradition. That's the kicker. Mass revelation plus unbroken tradition. There has never been a single year in Jewish history from Sinai until now that hundreds of thousands of Jews had not heard from the prior generation that we had mass revelation. When exactly would you introduce this lie logically? When would you do it? When in Jewish history do you stop and go, by the way, everybody, remember how your parents told you they heard God at Sinai? It's not going to, have you met us? The entire Torah is full of people saying, we don't believe Moses even though we're with him. We don't believe God even though we saw him. We question everything in the Torah. The Jewish people are frustrating. And nonetheless, we all agree on this. We've been passing it down from generation to generation. An unbroken chain with no gaps in it whatsoever of every generation telling the next generation that the generation before me told me that all of us, that my specific ancestors, not the Moses, not the leaders, my specific water carrier ancestor, my father's here, water carrier ancestor, saw it and was there. Mass revelation plus an unbroken chain. It's hard to imagine how you falsify that. I don't even know. I mean, I fancy myself a little bit of a cult leader, at least I'd like to be someday, and I don't know how I would do it. I don't know how I would do it. And by the way, nobody knows how you would do it. Is this a watertight argument? Is this a slam dunk? It's close. I'm sure there are logical disproofs to it. However, this one is real solid. And once again, we're not looking for solid slam dunk proofs. We're looking for consilience. I don't think any one of these arguments stands alone as rational, proof for Torah and for God, of good evidence that really is solid evidence that rises to the level that a scientist would take seriously. However, a scientist looking at this takes this very seriously. We have the argument from prophecy that the Torah tells us what's going to happen to us, and it happens, even when the Torah says things that make no sense, like that the land likes some people better than other people, and we see that the land likes us better than everybody else. We have the argument from history, the survival of the Jewish people through 2,000 years of exile. We have the argument from Jewish law, the fact that Jewish law and Kabbalah works together so perfectly. We have the argument of expert opinion, the great sages, the great geniuses, the serious people who have lived and died by our principles. We have the argument from design, a world too complex and too perfect and too just right, a planet just in the Goldilocks zone, cells that have ion channels that work just right to admit the ions that are necessary for life. Perfection in this world. And on top of it all, we have mass revelation and an unbroken tradition. I don't think we have a single scientific argument that has this much consilience of the evidence. I would argue that the rational evidence for Torah supersedes that of any scientific claim ever. So are there rational grounds for believing in God? And not just believing in God, but believing in the God of the Jews? In believing in the Torah and believing in Jewish law, in trusting that the tradition that we've had handed down from Sinai from the very beginning all the way until now is unaltered and perfect. If you believe anything, you should believe this. This one is better than the arguments you believe. I would challenge you to come up with anything that you believe that transcends this basic line of reasoning. It's incredible. And nonetheless, don't do it. You could build your Judaism on this. And you know what? I think it would work. And the only reason I'm telling you not to do it is you would be selling yourself short. I want to tell you a story. I want to conclude with a story. Rabbi Shmuel Levitin was a shliach of the Frierdiker Rebbe, of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe one time sent him to Chicago to have a conversation with a businessman who had wavered in his Jewish faith. And he went upstairs to a tall office building in Chicago. I don't know my old Chicago. I assume they had skyscrapers. I'm a New York person. We always had skyscrapers. Did Chicago have them in like the turn of the century? Maybe. So he goes up to what I imagine is a tall skyscraper by standards of 1910, 1920 in Chicago. He talks to the businessman. They have a good conversation. He encourages him in his Judaism. I'm making this part up, but I have experience with Chabad. Probably put tefillin on him. You cannot stop us. We're just nuts about that. So probably put tefillin on the poor guy. And after a long conversation, after strengthening his faith, and after encouraging him in Torah and mitzvahs, Reb Shmuel Levitin, he said to him, it's time for me to go. Take care. Goodbye. He's about to walk out of the building. And the businessman stops him. Wait. Reaches into his desk and pulls out a checkbook and says, who do I make it out to and how much do I owe for this fantastic Jewish experience? And for the first and last time in Jewish history, a rabbi uttered the words, I don't need or want your money. Please don't take this as an object lesson. Every rabbi nowadays needs and wants your money. Please find them and donate to them. Give all of your tzedakah to your local Orthodox rabbi, specifically to your Chabad and your JLI. That said, Shmuel Levitin said, I don't want your money. And the businessman said, ooh, this is part of the game, right? When a holy man doesn't want my money, I'll double it. And Shmuel Levitin goes, I don't even want double, which makes you wonder about Shmuel Levitin. I'm just kidding, obviously. He says, I don't want your money. I'm not here for money. I was here to strengthen you. And the businessman says back then, I don't understand what this entire game was. I thought this was an experience I was paying for. What are you doing here? What exactly is your job? Like, what do you do for a living? You go around not taking money to talk to people about Judaism? I don't understand. I mean, I kind of understand. But he didn't understand. Can relate. And Shmuel Levitin at that moment was inspired by God Almighty. A bit of prophecy enlightened his mind. And he said, you know what I'm like? I'm like a traveling scribe. In the old country, there used to be traveling scribes. The scribe would go from town to town. He would go into the Ark, the Aron Kodesh. He would open up the Ark. He would take out the Torah scrolls, and he would check them. He'd go through looking to see if perhaps a letter in the Torah had become erased, had become scratched out, had become permanently damaged. And he would fix it and then put it back together and put it back in the Ark. Said Reb Shmuel Levitin, this is my job. I travel around the world finding Jews and opening up the Torah scroll that is inside their heart, because every single Jew is a Torah scroll. I open up their scroll and I look and I see perhaps a letter has become erased, has become scratched out, has become irreparably damaged, and I fix them and put them back together. That is the job of a Chabad rabbi. The businessman was touched. And Reb Shmuel, I believe, was touched too, because let me tell you from experience, a good drasha lands both ways. And the two of them, having inspired one another and not exchanged any goods or services, perhaps services but not goods, Reb Shmuel Levitin returned to Crown Heights. When he came back to the Frierdiker Rebbe, he reported on his mission. And I'm going to make up this part of the story only for the purposes of artistic flair. The Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, I'll tell you what I'm doing. The previous Rebbe was not able to talk very well. The Russians had thrown him down several flights of stairs for the crime of keeping mikvahs going on in Russia, for the crime of keeping Judaism alive in Russia, and his soul was on fire, but his body was quite broken by the time he made it to America, and he didn't do a lot of talking. But you could tell by the nuances of things he did, the way that he would go silent or the way that he would animate, whether he was in agreement or disagreement with what you said. So allow me to paraphrase on behalf of the Frierdiker Rebbe, having told you this is not what happened, but allow me to paraphrase. Rav Shmuel Levitin told him the story, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was pleased. And he told him about his meeting with this Jew, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was pleased, and he told him about how he strengthened his interest in Torah and mitzvahs and didn't accept the money, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was pleased. And then Rav Shmuel said, you know, I came up with a mashal, a good parable for what a Chabad rabbi is, for what a rabbi is, for what a Jew is regarding their fellow Jew. And he told him the story of the Torah scroll, how there's towns where there used to be a sofer that would come and travel and open the Torah scroll, find a problem in the letter and fix it, put it back together. And when he told this to the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe effectively said, oh, that's horrible. I don't like that at all. That's totally wrong. It's not even close. Now, what actually happened is the Frierdiker Rebbe stopped moving and sort of stopped smiling. But that meant way off base. I've never heard anything so ridiculous in my entire life. And Shmuel, I assume, was a little crushed. The Frierdiker Rebbe did elaborate, though. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Rav Shmuel asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, but it says all over the Torah that Jewish people are like a Torah scroll. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, yeah, sort of, but not quite. A Torah scroll's letters can become smudged, can become scratched out, and can become damaged. A Jewish person's Torah cannot become damaged because a Jewish person's soul is like letters carved into stone. Oisies chakika, carved letters. A Jewish person cannot lose their faith. A Jewish person cannot lose their connection. A Jewish person can be nothing but perfect at all times in their Judaism because we don't have letters that are subject to smudging. We have the carved letters of Torah inside every single one of us. And to claim that a Jew could have their letters smudged or erased is heretical. No Jew has that problem. However, sometimes a thin layer of dust will settle on top of carved out letters. And a good friend needs to come by and blow it off. Remove the dust. These rational arguments are excellent for removing the dust on your inherent Judaism. But you don't necessarily need them for anything more than that. A Jew's faith comes from the fact that this is who we are and what we are. We are part of this project. When we look in the mirror, we see God staring back. Inside us, we have a literal piece of God. Our proof is ourselves. We don't base our faith on these ideas, but you know what these ideas are real good for? Dusting off the letters and finding who we are once again. I would encourage anybody to take these rational arguments with a bit of a grain of salt, not because they don't demonstrate consilience, they do. I think you have better proof for this than you do of anything in science, but because you have something better, and it's inside you already. I want to thank you all very, very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.